The average American family spends about $75 per year on sugar. Over a lifetime, that's more than $5,000 spent on something you could produce for free. There's a tree that grows across 31 states in America. One mature tree produces enough sap each spring to make a quart of pure syrup. If you have 5 trees in your yard, that's a year's worth of sweetener with zero recurring cost. And here's the remarkable part. That same tree will keep producing for over 100 years. Plant one today, and your great-grandchildren will still be tapping it in 2125. The sugar maple has fed families across North America for more than 8,000 years. For most of American history, making your own maple syrup was as common as growing tomatoes. Then something changed. Not an outright ban, nothing that dramatic. Just a slow, quiet process that made people forget they could do this themselves. A web of regulations that made small-scale production just complicated enough. A shift in culture that turned an everyday skill into something only professionals in Vermont could handle. And behind it all, an industry worth $60 billion that benefits every time you buy sugar instead of making it. This is the story of the tree that still produces free sweetener in millions of backyards, and why an entire generation forgot it was there. Long before European settlers arrived, indigenous peoples across the Northeast had mastered sugaring. Every spring, the Ojibwe built their entire march around what they called the sugar moon. The Haudenosaunee held ceremonies thanking the trees. They collected sap in birch bark containers and boiled it over open fires until thick syrup remained. This wasn't a delicacy. It was survival. Providing calories when stored, food ran low, and spring crops hadn't sprouted. When colonists arrived in the 1600s, they were astonished. Here was a sweetener that required no planting, no tropical climate, no shipping from Caribbean colonies. You simply walked into the forest in March, tapped a tree, and collected as much as you could process. By the 1700s, sugaring had become part of rural American life. Families across New England, New York, and the Great Lakes region tapped their sugar bushes every spring, trading syrup with neighbors and storing enough to last until the next season. But this wasn't just a hobby for early Americans. It was a tool of revolution. Long before we were trapped in a $75 a year sugar subscription, one of the founding fathers realized that these trees were the key to American independence. Thomas Jefferson hated sugar. Not the taste, but what it represented. Caribbean sugar plantations ran on slave labor. Every spoonful of white sugar sold in American shops was stained with human suffering. In 1790, Jefferson wrote that maple sugar could make America independent from what he called that greatest of all calamities, the sugar trade built on bondage. He planted sugar maples at Monticello specifically to promote domestic production. He distributed saplings to other farmers. For Jefferson, this was about creating an ethical alternative to plantation crops, what some called an abolitionist sweetener. That vision never fully materialized, but for decades, maple syrup sat on kitchen shelves across the northern United States as a small act of resistance. It wasn't exotic, it was everyday fuel, the way people sweetened their coffee and baked their pies. And for nearly 200 years, that's how it stayed. Common, accessible, something ordinary people did for themselves. In the mid-1800s, everything shifted. Sugarcane plantations and sugar beet farms industrialized. New technologies made production faster and cheaper. By 1900, refined white sugar cost less per pound than maple sugar, and it was available year-round. Maple syrup didn't vanish overnight, but it faded. Grocery stores stocked refined sugar because it had long shelf life and reliable supply chains. Maple was seasonal, variable, and required local knowledge. That might have been the end of the story, except what happened next wasn't just market forces, it was systematic. Starting in the 1920s, the commercial sugar industry began lobbying state legislatures. Their public goal was consumer protection, preventing fraud where corn syrup was sold as maple. That's legitimate, but the regulations didn't stop at truth in labeling. State after state passed laws requiring anyone who sold maple syrup to obtain commercial food production licenses. Then came mandatory equipment inspections, bottling permits, and expensive labeling requirements. Then sanitary certifications that banned production in home kitchens unless you built a separate license structure. Here's where it gets interesting. In many states today, producing syrup for your household is perfectly legal. But the moment you want to sell a jar at a farmer's market or trade with your neighbor for eggs, you enter a regulatory maze designed for operations processing thousands of gallons. In West Virginia, you need a $50 permit, but only if you sell more than $1,000 worth per year. In Louisiana, small producers can sell without a license under $20,000 annually. But in other states, any commercial transaction requires full licensing. The same requirements for a backyard tapper, making 5 gallons, as for a commercial operation, making 5,000 gallons. These laws didn't appear because of a public health crisis. Maple syrup has one of the safest track records of any traditional food. There has never been a widespread outbreak of illness from home-produced syrup, unlike honey or home-canned vegetables, which face far fewer restrictions. The goal wasn't safety, it was forgetting. If tapping trees looks complicated, if it seems like something requiring permits and inspections, then ordinary people assume it's not for them. They assume the trees in their yard are decorative, not functional. By the 1950s, most Americans under 40 had never seen anyone tap a tree. The knowledge passed out of common practice and into specialized skill. Something Vermonters did, something requiring expertise most people didn't have. But the trees never stopped producing, they're still there. Here's something most people don't realize. The window for sugaring is closing. Not metaphorically, literally. Climate change is rewriting the rules for maple production. Sugar maples need cold winter dormancy, then a reliable freeze-thaw cycle in early spring. Nights below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, days above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature swing creates pressure inside the tree that pushes sap up from the roots. Over the past 40 years, that window has been shrinking. Research from the University of Vermont shows sugaring season now starts about 8 days earlier than in the 1970s, but it also ends sooner. The total season has dropped by roughly 1 week. Warmer winters mean fewer freeze-thaw cycles, and unpredictable weather means sap runs are less consistent. By 2100, climate models predict the viable sugaring range will have shifted 300 miles north. The trees might survive in warmer climates, but they will not produce sap the way they do now. If you have mature sugar maples in your yard today, you are living in a narrow window when tapping them is still reliable. Your children might still be able to do it. Your grandchildren might not. That makes this knowledge more urgent, not less. Let's talk about what one tree is actually worth, not in lumber value, but in sweetener production over its lifetime. A healthy sugar maple that is 14 inches in diameter can take 1 tap. That tree will produce about 10 gallons of sap per season. Boil it down using the standard 40:1 ratio, and you get 1 quart of syrup. At current retail prices, that is about $15 to $20 worth of syrup. 1 tree, 1 season. Now here's where it gets interesting. That tree will keep producing for 100 years or more. Let's be conservative and say 80 years. 1 tree, 80 seasons, 80 quarts of syrup. That's 20 gallons total, worth $1,200 to $1,600 at today's prices. And that's just one tree. If you have 5 mature maples in your yard, which is common in older suburban neighborhoods, you're looking at 50 quarts per season. Over the lifetime of those trees, that's 100 gallons of syrup, worth $8,000 to $10,000 in purchasing power. You plant a sugar maple today, and 40 years from now, it will be mature enough to tap. Your children will tap it. Your grandchildren will tap it. You are literally planting an edible legacy, a resource that produces value long after you're gone. Compare that to buying sugar, $75 per year, every year, forever. You never own the source. You're always dependent on a supply chain, always vulnerable to price increases, always feeding profit to corporations that spent a century making sure you forgot you had another option. One system wants you renting, the other gives you ownership. Here's the truth. Tapping is simpler than growing tomatoes. You need a drill with a 5/16 inch bit, a metal spout called a spile, a food-grade bucket, and a way to boil large amounts of liquid. A basic kit costs about $40. In late February or early March, you watch the weather forecast. When nighttime lows drop into the 20s and daytime highs climb into the 40s, the SAP starts running. You drill one hole about 2 inches deep, angled slightly upward, tap a spile into the hole, hang your collection container, walk away. Over the next 4 to 6 weeks, that container fills with SAP. It looks almost like water. That's because fresh SAP is only 2% sugar. Maple syrup is 66% sugar, measured on the brick scale. That's why it takes 40 gallons of SAP to make 1 gallon of syrup. You collect the SAP every day or two and boil it in a large pot, usually outdoors over a propane burner or wood fire. Boil it indoors and the humidity will peel wallpaper off your walls. When your hydrometer reads 66 bricks, you've got syrup. The whole process is something a 12-year-old can do. People have been teaching this to children for 8,000 years. What it does require is time. Boiling 40 gallons down to 1 gallon takes hours. For a backyard operation making 5 or 10 gallons, you're looking at several long afternoons. It's not difficult, but it is work. Here's something no one talks about publicly, but everyone in the backyard sugaring community knows. There's an entire informal economy around homemade maple syrup that operates between legal and illegal. You're not supposed to sell it without a license. But people do. They sell at farm gate stands, church fundraisers, in quiet transactions with neighbors. Some label it as a gift and suggest a donation. Enforcement is rare. State agriculture departments focus on large commercial operations. The odds of getting fined for selling a few jars of backyard syrup are low, though not zero. Many small producers give syrup away and trade for other goods. This is the gift economy, the way humans exchange value for thousands of years. It's not technically legal in many states if the trade value exceeds certain thresholds, but it's how communities have always worked. I'm not giving legal advice. I'm just telling you what happens. The risk exists, but it's small. And for many people, the reward is worth navigating the grey area. If you live anywhere from Minnesota to Maine, from southern Canada down through the Appalachians, you likely have sugar maples nearby. You can identify them by their classic 5-lobed leaves, grey-brown bark with vertical ridges, and brilliant fall colours. If you own property with mature sugar maples, you can tap them. In most states, producing syrup for your own household is completely legal. Start small. Tap 1 or 2 trees this spring. A basic kit costs less than a tank of gas. Watch the weather. When the conditions are right, drill your hole, insert your spile, hang your bucket, and wait. The first time sap drips into that bucket, something shifts. You realize the tree was always producing this. You just never knew to ask. If you don't own sugar maples, check with neighbors, local parks, or land trusts. Many property owners are happy to let people tap trees in exchange for a share of the syrup. Urban foraging groups in some cities organize community tapping days. Your local university extension office often has free guides. Many states have maple producer associations that run winter workshops for beginners. The knowledge is still there. It just got buried under a century of industrial food systems that benefit when you keep buying instead of making. The sugar maple never disappeared. It's still there, standing in yards and forests across millions of acres. What disappeared was the cultural memory that you could use them. That story was convenient for an industry that needed you to keep buying sugar. And it worked. For 2 or 3 generations, most Americans forgot that the trees in their yard were a resource. But forgetting isn't permanent. Knowledge can come back. The trees are still standing. The SAP still runs every spring. The only question is whether you're going to collect it. So here's what I want to know. If you have sugar maples near you, what's actually stopping you from tapping them this spring? Is it the time, the equipment cost, uncertainty about the process? Or is it just that no one ever told you that you were allowed to try? Because you are. The trees are yours, or your neighbors, or the public's. The sap is free, the knowledge is available, and the system that wants you to keep buying can't actually stop you from boiling down sap in your own backyard. If this reminded you that some of the best resources still grow free and ignored, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. Every week, we uncover another piece of knowledge that the industrial food system would prefer stayed buried. Next week, we're looking at the backyard pond system that produces more protein per square foot than any vegetable in your garden, feeds itself, and costs almost nothing to maintain. It's been used in Asia for thousands of years. Until then, look up. The sugar trees are still standing, the sap is still running, and you're one drill hole away from making something that tastes like spring.